Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Ann and I'm an alcoholic.
I am.
This is our third Recovery Sunday. We've celebrated at Trinity. It's an honor to be here. Last year I shared my experience, strength, and hope, and also I shared my dream of beginning a Trinity sobriety support ministry. And I'm delighted to tell you that we formed such a ministry in November of last year. Our motto is inspired by John 5, verse 6, when Jesus asked, "Do you want to be made well?" Here's our mission. In our Christ-centered ministry, we invite people curious about their relationship with harmful substances and behaviors to consider the spiritual gifts of wellness that God offers with healing love. We serve everyone, people who are sober curious, people seeking and maintaining sobriety, and importantly, family and friends supportive of the sobriety journey of their loved ones. We meet via Zoom the first Monday of each month from 7 to 8:30 for fellowship and discussion. Some of the topics that have been promoted by people in the group themselves have included how to care for ourselves during the holidays, how to cope with powerlessness, enabling, fear, hope, and resentment, but also how to embrace acceptance, courage, and wisdom, comfortably wearing the yoke of Jesus. At our November 6th meeting, we'll be sharing our favorite prayer and meditation practices. We are a ministry of resurrection, healing, and new life. This year, we also offered a multi-week book group reading and discussing Richard Rohr's book, Breathing Underwater, Spirituality of the 12 Steps. And that encourages all of us to be honest with God, with ourselves, and with others. That's the foundation of the 12 Steps. We'll offer such a group again in early 2024. If you're interested in learning more, please talk to me. There's a table outside in the covered courtyard that has a lot of materials from the recovery ministry of the Episcopal Church, which has been around for 44 years. And you're welcome to take anything that's on the table. It's free. And now it's my great honor to present our preacher for today, Bill McGrath.
Good morning. My name is Bill.
Hi, Bill.
I am a third-generation alcoholic and a cocaine addict. And this is my story. My relationship with alcohol goes back to college and law school. But on reflection, although I did not drink a lot during those years, what I became aware of was when I did drink, I didn't or couldn't stop. In 1972, I graduated from McGeorge, took and passed the bar exam in Colorado, and got my license to practice in September 1972. I also got my real estate broker's license at that same time. Over the next 4 years, I built my law practice and a real estate company that I had acquired in exchange for my legal fees. But my drinking increased so much that my wife and the mother of my 2 sons wanted a divorce. Although I suggested counseling and that I would stop drinking, she was adamant. So I filed for dissolution of our marriage and moved out. I was bemoaning the dissolution to a friend shortly thereafter, and he said, "I know just what you need." Out came the white powder, and I was introduced to cocaine. Now, I'd like to suggest and tell you that it never got any more serious than that. But we know that these are addictive substances. 3 years later, I married her. She too was a drinker and had experienced cocaine. We indulged both heavily. I quit several times, each with the intention that it was for good. I had 2 sons with whom I was not really involved, and I was experiencing increasing difficulty and challenges focusing and doing my work. Then one day, my managing partner, when everyone else had left the office, came into my office, closed the door, and said that he and my other partners had talked and they no longer wanted me in the law firm. Our partnership was over. They would assist me in pushing work to me, but I would no longer be able to do work in the name of McGrath and Callan, a firm that we had established over 13 years before. I was in shock, and we both had tears in our eyes. Reflecting on how I could possibly still face the community, I sold our home and we moved to Denver. I had a manager in my real estate office, so at least that broker-owner income would continue. I bought a home in the suburb of Aurora and rented an office in a shared law office building. My law practice, such as it was, proved little income, and I was no longer inspired to do much about it. When my second marriage started having problems, I was referred to a clinical psychologist by the rector in my church in Aurora. Dr. Jerry Cox and I hit it off right away, both Episcopalians, and we had common college athletic backgrounds. I started marital counseling, but my wife was little interested, so most of our sessions were helping me with problems that I had being the oldest child growing up in an alcoholic family with a physically and emotionally abusive father. Early in the new year, I had a call from 2 young men who were in the planning stages to start another restaurant. Although business was discussed at our meeting, at their main restaurant, the afternoon and late into the night are memorable for all the cocaine and alcohol that was consumed. I later learned that I had blown off a director's meeting for one of my corporate clients and an evening municipal zoning meeting for another client. I do not remember how or when I drove home, but my wife told me the next morning that she heard the garage door go up at about 3 a.m., but I did not come to bed until sometime around 4 a.m. I awoke with my usual pounding headache. As I was making my coffee, I was thinking, once again, that to dull the hangover, to take off the edge, I needed to hit a hit or two from my vodka bottle in the fridge. But new thoughts would not leave me. I had hit a new level in my drinking and drugging, a very dangerous new level. Not only had the drinking and drugging interfered with my business, I had not cared that it did so. I did not open the fridge. When I walked into my garage, I discovered my car parked almost sideways. How did I get it in there without hitting anything? It took me several minutes of careful back and forth to get it out. And as I was doing so, I heard a loud scraping underneath. I was shocked to see a small tree wedged under, almost the entire length of my car. I could not budge that tree. Walking back to the house, I hated myself thinking, look how far down you've come. You have no idea where you hit that tree, but you were obviously off the road, wherever that was. What didn't you hit this time? You could have killed yourself or someone else. And for what? Look yourself in the mirror. You're 44. You've got two beautiful sons who are crying to spend time with you. If you have nothing else, aren't they worth having their dad alive? Are you stronger than the booze and the alcohol? Or are you going to let that stuff kill you? The full realization hit me. I was going to be dead soon if I did not stop right now. Back in the house, I told my wife I was done with booze and alcohol and drugs. She chuckled because she had already heard that several times. Then I called Dr. Cox and left a long message on his voicemail. He called me back as I was arranging to take my car in to get the tree cut out. Dr. Cox asked my plan for the day, which I had already determined. First, an AA meeting. Then, an NA meeting. He asked me to meet him at 3 p.m. at St. John's Episcopal Cathedral downtown, his home church. When I got to the cathedral, he offered to admit me for a 30-day inpatient recovery program. But I was adamant that I was going to do this cold turkey. I had a very different desire and a pretty clear understanding of all that I had been and done in the last several years. But I wanted to continue our therapy sessions. We met with the dean and one other clergy member. Names have long gone from my memory. From our Book of Common Prayer, together we said prayers for addiction, for guidance, for quiet confidence, for self-dedication, and for the answering of prayer. I renewed my baptismal covenant, and by then I was crying uncontrollably. I was then rebaptized. We said the Lord's Prayer and passed the peace. With hugs all around, that ceremony was the most powerful faith experience I have ever had. I left that cathedral a whole different man. From that day, Saturday, January 19th, 1985, my recovery from alcohol and cocaine has been day to day and without relapse. I worked every one of the 12 steps. I worked every one of the 12 steps and was active for a number of years in AA and NA. But I have never lost the resolve that my Lord and Savior has walked beside me this entire 38 years, and He is here with me right now as I am speaking to you. My marriage to Jackie on August 10, 2002 was over 17 years into my recovery, and I have been able to give my whole mind, body, and soul to that precious relationship. I know that I have been blessed with sobriety, and I also know that I have an obligation in honoring those who helped me to pass it on. I have done so often through the years as a teacher, speaker, mentor, and sponsor. Most recently, this past February through May, I participated in a 13-week program based on Richard Rohr's book, Breathing Underwater, Spirituality and the 12 Steps, co-led by our Reverend Ann McKeever and our fellow cathedral member Kenny Pierce. No matter where you are in your relationship with alcohol, I urge you to get that book and to join us again when we do another one of this program, probably sometime this winter. Richard Rohr has a refreshing perspective on the 12 steps. I so appreciate your time and your attention. Let me leave you now with an additional thought from 2 Timothy 4. As for you, always be sober, endure suffering, and do the work of an evangelist. Carry out your ministry fully. Amen.
Good morning. My name is Kenny and I am an alcoholic. On this Recovery Sunday, I would like to speak to you about liberation. I would like to talk about freedom from the empty promises and false seduction that entrap those of us who have struggled to overcome addiction to substances. I would like to reread this passage from today's gospel reading. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set free those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. In this passage from Luke at the outset of his ministry in Galilee, Jesus reads from chapter 61 of Isaiah and conveniently leaves out the next line from that passage in Isaiah. And the day of vengeance of our God. That's interesting. The good news that Jesus proclaims in this inaugural reading in the synagogue is that of liberation, recovery, and freedom from oppression. In promising liberation, Jesus shifts the focus from retribution and vengeance to restoration and healing. And I find that to be fascinating. It was an omission that infuriated those in power present to Jesus' reading, but as somebody in recovery from an addiction to alcohol, I find Jesus' focus to be infinitely comforting. Most biblical scholars agree that the year of the Lord's favor harkens back to the Jubilee years enshrined in Leviticus, a divinely ordained promise of restoration and reset. The Jubilee promises a new start for those gripped by debt and heavy burden. Stepping back a couple of verses in Luke, this passage immediately follows the temptations of Jesus in the desert. There, Jesus encounters the great accuser in the wilderness, offering empty promises if Jesus would transform a stone into something that nourishes the body, power and glory if Jesus would bow to that which seeks to destroy, and salvation if he tempts fate with reckless self-destruction. It is impossible for me not to see the glorious promises of freedom that Jesus offers here as being directly tied to the empty promises in the spiritual wildernesses where so many of us took up residence for so long. Promises that held so many of us in captivity. Far too many of those of us who live in the shadow of the disease of alcoholism has succumbed to those promises. And make no mistake, the promises are powerful, seductive, and their grip is relentless. Those of us who are able to transcend that grip are offered a daily reprieve by learning to trust that the power and grace of God can offer freedom from that toxic hold upon us. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set free those who are oppressed. It is an odd paradox, but we regain control only by releasing it to God. And God's grace is never more evident than when it works through the stories of others like us that reach our ears. This coming January, God willing, it will have been 25 years since I uttered the words, "I am an alcoholic," for the first time. I was pretty reluctant to own that reality in the winter of 1999. You see, the last thing I wanted to be separated from was my crutch, my best friend, my counterpart, my chief means of temporarily feeling charismatic and desirable. Most of us who enter rehab or the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous or other forms of recovery don't want to willingly give up on the kind of romantic waltz we dance with our drugs of choice. Most of us could not imagine a world where our best friend would be taken from us. That constant companion promises power, desirability, wit, and acceptance. And I listened to the siren song and bowed to it on a nightly basis for 17 years as I drank myself quite nearly to death. You can have it all. You can lose your anxiety, your fear, your insecurity, and you will be glorious so long as you dance with me, so long as I am your foundation. The police officer in Seattle who stopped me for drunk driving in December of 1998 literally gave me my life back. It took a while to understand the gift I'd been given that rainy winter night in Washington State. I reflect back on that time and on what those who walk a similar path with others in recovery taught me. I learned from recoveries what I now understand to be the Christian motif of death and resurrection. My brothers and sisters in recovery taught me about the power of transformation and how the grace of God works miracles in the margins of polite society. When society has washed its hands of us, when our families are at wit's end, when friends walk away and when we've given up on ourselves, we are held by others in recovery in those margins. About a month ago, I was sitting on a bench in the cathedral's courtyard. I was passing a bit of time before I needed to leave for an event, and I felt strangely called to sit in quiet for a few minutes. As I was sitting, a young man walked up and sat down. He looked troubled, and he asked if there was a service that evening or if there was any clergy member available who could talk to him. I told him that there were none that evening, but I asked if he attended services here. He said that he didn't, but needed to talk. And then he asked me a question, and that question stopped me in my tracks. Do you think that it's possible to be so far gone that it's impossible to find your way back? I'm not sure why my instinct was to share my story in recovery with him as a response to that question. But over the next 30 minutes, I shared my history around addiction and of similar internal messages of despair that haunted me in years past. I told him of my journey of recovery and of the hope that I had found when I opened myself up to God's work through support communities. He opened up about his current struggles with addiction and the battle with an anxiety disorder that tormented, and it was all so familiar to me. I let him know about the support services offered at the cathedral and the hope that I had found in attending similar groups over the years. I let him know that I understood how vulnerable and anxiety-inducing sharing your authentic story in front of strangers can be, but how I've come to see that sharing as being key to our freedom. Above all, I implored him to come back as often as was necessary and to never succumb to the empty lie that would have us believe that we are beyond hope. That lying voice inside of us screams into our souls an empty message that the hope of God's restoration and redemption offered to so many who have become clean and sober is meant for others but not for us. I reminded this young man that this is the lie that must above all be recognized for what it is. Empty beliefs that our drugs of choice are our answers, and that there's no other avenue of hope available to us. I reminded him that this is never how God's grace works in the world and in us. I dare say that this mini recovery meeting that called me to minister to another when I least expected it was the liberating Spirit of God at work, placing me exactly where I was meant to be when God's grace was most needed. As always, that healing work transpired through my story. Here at Trinity Cathedral, I'm blessed to be able to co-facilitate monthly sobriety support meetings with the Reverend McKeever. We meet on the first Monday of every month for 90 minutes and discuss a theme in recovery. Insights offered by attendees in those meetings are truly profound. This past year, we offered a 15-week series developed by Father Richard Rohr entitled Breathing Underwater, which takes the 12 steps that we learn in Alcoholics Anonymous and applies these to broader Christian living. It has been so gratifying to see attendees join us regularly, not just from the cathedral, but from across the diocese. In those precious support and formation meetings, Reverend Ann and I have witnessed the spirit of support and liberation promised by Jesus in today's gospel, alive and well. Whether people join us from Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, Al-Anon, Adult Children of Alcoholics, or other recovery groups, we find comfort and support in one another's stories and perspectives. In those meetings, we become the hands and feet of Christ at work in the world that carry his good news of recovery, of freedom, and of restoration to others in need. It is holy and wonderful work, and it is an honor to be witness to what unfolds. So thank you for letting us offer our reflections on liberation and healing this morning. And I close with this quote by the marvelous Brene Brown that reminds us of the power of our story to restore and heal others, and to ensure our freedom by the grace of God, working through the hope and solidarity born from our transformed pain. One day, you will tell your story of how you overcame what you went through, and it will become someone else's survival guide. Thank you.